Y'all? We back with a college football special. Of course, today we're going to get into our college football playoff matchups, our college football playoff predictions. Well, my predictions, yours in the comments, I hope. And as well as college football teams that may have been snubbed that could have got into the playoffs. And also, another thing that I think is a big topic of discussion, although it's different because it's pro sports or college sports. I think that if you were to add another two teams into the college football playoffs, it would solve a lot of issues moving forward. So we'll get into a lot of that in this. And of course, the first matchup is Alabama versus Oklahoma. This is a super interesting matchup, of course, because with this matchup here, of course, they've already played each other a few weeks ago. And Bama hasn't been playing their best ball lately, right? Obviously, they lost against Oklahoma in that first matchup at home. Now they're traveling to Norman to face Oklahoma on the road in a matchup where you don't really know what to expect because of the fact that Alabama, as I said earlier, isn't playing really good as of late. You know, a lot of people are saying this is the team that should have been put out because of the way that they got embarrassed in the SEC championship. You know, there was a lot of talk about how they decided to punt the ball on fourth and short in the fourth quarter, or I'm sorry, in the third quarter, down multiple scores, you know, with basically conceding defeat. So that way they didn't give up another touchdown to Georgia to get blown out even worse. You know, it was a lot of discussions in that game there that had people believe in the way that Alabama has looked over the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season that they shouldn't have got in. But of course, we'll get into those discussions on teams that may have been snubbed later. We want to stay on topic here with this Alabama and Oklahoma game. Like I said, this is a super, super tough game because you just don't know what to expect in this matchup. I've been back and forth since the matchups have been announced officially, just because you would like to say that Alabama would go on the road and lose, considering Tuscaloosa is a tough place to play, and Oklahoma went into there and was able to get it done. And really, Alabama didn't really show me much in that game that would make me think that they could go on the road into a tough environment and win. However, they do play in the SEC. They did have the toughest schedule in the SEC. They were the one seed in the SEC. So a lot of things still matter. They still have that pedigree. And then, of course, Oklahoma. I think Mateer's finally starting to get back in his rhythm. I'm just not super sold on if I can trust him in a game like this. But against a familiar opponent, you just were able to knock off not long ago. And, you've been playing better ball lately. Like I said, you had just in the SEC championship, Alabama took that loss 28-7. The week prior to that, they played Auburn on the road, got a 27-20 game in a very tough game in which it looked like in a few moments in that game that they were going to lose. Of course, the week prior to that was just a throwaway game. And then November 15th was the matchup that we're, seeing again in the first round, which was the Oklahoma matchup. And they came into that game as 6.5-point favorites at home and lost 23-21. And then, of course, the LSU game wasn't the prettiest, game for them either. So we're talking all the way back to November 8th. Alabama really hasn't played good football, if we're being honest. So going into this, they're a slight favorite on the road. Um, I do think that Alabama ends up getting it done. I mean, when you look at the stats, however you want to look at it, Alabama is better in every statistical category that they have. And I think something that Oklahoma, because there's about two categories that Oklahoma is winning in, and one that's super important is their red zone efficiency, because they're 100% in the red zone. They're 32 or 32 in the red zone at 100%. And Alabama's not bad, of course, 49 for 56 at 87.5. But when you get into that red zone and you're 100%, man, I'll tell you what, like, what do you do when you get a team down there and they're capitalizing every time? But of course, like I said, Alabama's not terrible there either. So I don't take too much out of that. because I do think this will be a low scoring game for different reasons. I definitely think it'll be a low scoring game, but I like Alabama to win a tough one. I do think their defense is just a little better. I do think they'll come out with a chip on their shoulder, considering the fact of all the noise that's been surrounding them actually getting into the playoffs. So they'll play with a little motivation there. And then they know on top of that, they're not playing their best ball as of late. So to make people feel like they have nothing to say, they got to come out and make a statement tonight. This is a complete 50-50 game. The odds almost even say it. Like I said, that you actually have, oh, I'm sorry. So Oklahoma's actually 1.5 point favorites now. They opened up as 1.5 point underdog. So the line has actually flipped. And like I said, I'm going to Alabama to win a close one. But Oklahoma, obviously, it's a pick 'em. This game can go either way. I'm actually going to, as I'm doing this with y'all, I'm going to do my bracket challenge here. So let's see. We're gonna go ahead and pull this up here with y'all. Y'all can see that. Yeah, we should be good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and pick Alabama on that one, right? And then we'll get back to the other matchups as we talk about them. Like I said, they're beating them in every statistical category. I know they lost that last one. Oklahoma is 4-1 in their last 5 games, but I just think that this is a matchup that Alabama has to get revenge. They know they're going on the road, hostile environment. They had 2 weeks to prepare. They have the better pedigree. Oklahoma's had their number in the last few years, though, as far as their matchups go. So this is a big game. You know, does Alabama lose 3 straight to Oklahoma, dating back to the big matchup last season as well? I just don't see that happening. But that's why the game has to be played. So we'll see how it goes. But like I said, I'm going Alabama in a close one, a very close one, because I think it's going to be a defensive game. It's going to be super big, super important for Trenton Simpson to come out and perform early because, as I stated, they haven't looked very good the last few weeks. And for that reason, you would want to say that it would be a good matchup because, as I mentioned earlier, red zone efficiency, Oklahoma is first in the country. Of course, I said they had it 32 for 32, so that sounds about right. Alabama, on the other hand, is 52nd in the country in red zone efficiency. However, they're 35th on third down conversions, to where Oklahoma is 80th. And so they're two big things. Their rushing yards per game, they're 12 apart, and ranking average at 106 and 118. And then Bama's 40 ranks better than them as far as passing, as their top 25 in passing. So I think this is going to be a super good game. And then defensively, of course, Oklahoma also leads the country in sacks, and Alabama barely gets to that quarterback. So that could be something, because if they give Mateer a lot of time and he can make them plays, extend plays, it could be a long night for Bama again. I don't know. This matchup is so intriguing. But like I said, you have Simpson. I mean, he's thrown for 3,268 yards this season. Of course, Mateer, 2,578. He missed a few games. 14 mile per hour winds. That's going to be big because you know the college kicking game isn't always the best. So the 14 miles per hour wind is crucial. I told you, as I said 2 or 3 times already, I think that this game will be super low scoring. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm going with Alabama to get a win in a close one. And then, of course, following that game, we can go ahead and touch on this Oregon JMU game. I think Oregon's going to win this easily. Shout out to JMU for being able to get into the college football playoffs. Hell of an achievement for their program. However, they're just completely outmatched. I know I've seen some people believing that JMU can go into Eugene and give Oregon a good go. I just don't see that happening. Even if their offense can perform well for 2 quarters or whatever it may be, there's no way that defense holds up to be able to stop that Oregon offense. Dante Moore's looked good all season. That offense is a problem. That team is a problem. They're one of the best in the country for a reason. And I just don't think that, although JMU was fortunate enough to get into this playoffs, that they'll go into Eugene and really have a chance in this one. If they do, it may be for a quarter. Me recording this, maybe it don't end well or age well, but nonetheless, I'm very confident in Oregon to go in there and handle business. I think they came in as 20.5-point favorites. I wouldn't be surprised if JMU ends up covering that late. But again, I don't expect this game to be very close at all, so I don't want to waste too much time on it. Because this is for a bigger discussion later when we talk about teams that may or may have not been snubbed. I'm not saying JMU didn't deserve this spot, but again, this will lead to conversations later as far as the teams that may or may not been snubbed. So I'm going to keep it short on this one. Like I said, I think Oregon takes care of business easily. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go head over here into this bracket so I can fill out Oregon, which is there. And then since this one I had already accidentally picked, we'll go ahead and do that one because I do think that this will be another matchup kind of like the one we just talked about. I know Lane Kiffin's gone. The defensive coordinator took over. I don't expect anything different from a team like Ole Miss. They've got some great wins this year. I mean, there was a video earlier, probably a month or so ago, where Tulane's coach was saying he appreciates the respect that people are giving them, but he didn't think that they were a college football playoff caliber team. So the fact that they ended up winning and actually getting in, although he felt that way and was completely transparent with his team, I think that's a big thing because, again, if the coach feels like that, that doesn't mean you sell the players short of what their goals and dreams are, of course, trying to compete for a national championship. But when you're not a Power 4 school and your coach feels that way and you're putting them in there with the best of the best, I think it could be a little tricky. But again, Tulane did deserve to be in over JMU. So at worst, Tulane deserved to be in the college football playoffs. But just from a standpoint of like an outsider looking in, when I seen the coach say that and he was like, I'm completely transparent with my guys, I'm like, I respect the honesty, because a lot of coaches wouldn't say something like that on the stage, especially when they know they have an opportunity at the biggest goal. But the fact that they're here, that when the coach feels like that, I'm not going to have belief in them because I'm not a fan or alum of Tulane. So I think that, like I said, Ole Miss will take care of business easy in that one as well. So I went ahead and put my pick on there for that. And then we're going to get into the next matchup, which will be, who is it? We will do, let's see, Miami versus Texas A&M. So I think this is the most intriguing matchup of the first round for many different reasons. For one, College Station is a tough place to play, maybe the toughest place to play in all of college football. It's going to be at capacity. It's going to be rocking. All of those things, of course, we know. Another thing is they're from the SEC, so a lot of people are going to overlook Miami because maybe some feel like they shouldn't have got in. That's another conversation for the college football snubs talk that we'll have later as well. But I think that this is going to be the best matchup of the first round because you look at the spread and you have a 3.5-point favorite. And as I mentioned, you're talking about one of the best home field advantages in football. So you got to take into account that on top of them being a good football team, them being ranked higher, them having a better record. And all of that equates to them being 3.5-point favorites at home, which tells me this game is an even matchup, and Miami may even be slightly better than them. And just hear me out. I'm telling y'all, they may just be slightly better than them. And I'm going to tell you why. Because they played in the SEC, because Texas A&M played in the SEC, everyone gives them praise because they were ranked as a top 3 team in the country all year. Well deserved. Not saying that that doesn't make a factor. But when you look at their schedule, they didn't play any of the top teams in the SEC. In fact, Texas was the best team they played all year in the SEC, which was their last game of the season, and we've seen what happened. When they played, because I want to make sure I get this correct here, when they played South Carolina at home, South Carolina was not playing good ball. South Carolina had them on the ropes at halftime. And shout out to Texas A&M because the second half was One to remember. And they came back and won that game 31-30 because they completed a second half shutout in the game they were losing 30-3 at halftime. 30-3 at halftime. And you don't ever want to discredit the defense, but if you do something like that in the playoffs, you're not going to recover. So that was their game at South Carolina. Then they had a game against a nobody that they beat 48-0. Then they came back off of that performance that they ended on a win, gritty win, bad start, gritty finish. Then they lose to Texas, where they were 2.5-point favorites by 10 points, and they couldn't even score 20 points in the game. And we know this is college football, so sometimes it's like that. But again, I believe when they beat Mizzou may have been ranked. LSU, they beat LSU by 24 points, which is a good win, even though LSU wasn't near what they should have been this year. But again, you look at their schedule, they didn't beat anybody good that was in the SEC this year. And as I mentioned earlier, the only good team they played was Texas, and they lost that matchup. So let me see here. Just to make sure that I'm clear, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody because I'm almost certain I know this schedule. I don't think these guys played anybody. So they opened up with UTSA, then Utah State. I'm sorry, I forgot Notre Dame, which was our common opponent. And we'll get back to that in a minute. They played Notre Dame the week after we did and beat them. Then they played Auburn. Auburn wasn't that good, 16-10. Mississippi State's not good, especially when they travel to you. They're a pretty good home team because it'd be rocking at their home stadium. But on the road, like, it's Mississippi State. They got a win over Florida, which wasn't any good this year. Arkansas. So when they beat LSU, LSU was still ranked at 20. So they were on their way down, as we now know. When they beat Mizzou, they were 22. So they were on their way down now, as we know. South Carolina game we already spoke on. Then they played Samford, which is whatever. Then they played Texas and lost, which was the highest ranked team outside of Notre Dame they played all year, which Notre Dame was at the beginning of the season. And we don't want to discredit that win because that's a good win. I don't care when you beat a team, you beat them. So you say 41-40. They beat Notre Dame. So in a shootout, they beat Notre Dame. A week after Miami beat Notre Dame, 27-24, I believe this was the score. Actually, let me find out right here. But the interesting thing with that was Notre Dame scored, I believe, 2 garbage time touchdowns in that game to even make it look good because it wasn't that very good of a game. And then, everybody tried to discredit and say it was an early win for Miami. And then you turn around and, went to A&M. And now we know A&M was one of the best teams in the country this year. And, yeah, they beat them 41-40. So, and with that being said, again, this isn't saying that Miami's schedule was super tough because it wasn't. But all I'm saying is for Texas A&M to be here out of the SEC, they're getting a lot of SEC praise when they didn't beat any of the best teams or even have to play any of the best teams. And to consider when you put that into perspective that they didn't even make the conference championship because of a loss to Texas and you didn't play anybody else out of the top dogs. You know what I mean? Georgia and Bama played. Texas played these guys. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, y'all were the only team, I guarantee you, out of the SEC that didn't really have a tough SEC schedule. You got to play the teams that were underachieved in your conference this year, like LSU. But again, I think that this is a super interesting matchup because then Miami has, of course, the win over Notre Dame. That was number 6 at the time. A win over USF, which is South Florida, for the ones that may not know, at 18 at the time. Then they got a win over Florida State, which was 18 at the time. And then they got a win at Pitt the last week of the season, which was ranked at the time. And all of those wins, 28-22, 49-12, 27-24, which we talked about the Notre Dame game. It was more, they closed the gap late, garbage time points. And then Pitt, 38-7 on the road, like dominated them. And then, of course, they had the 2 terrible losses, SMU, 26-20 in overtime. And then the loss at Louisville, 24-21, which wasn't a ranked Louisville loss, but the following week, I believe that put them in the top 25 for a little bit, for a few weeks. So, I think this is a super interesting game. I don't know. The trenches is going to be big because Miami has a good O-line. Texas A&M has a good O-line. I do think Miami has the edge up front, though, as far as that goes. The run game is better in Texas A&M, but the run game and physicality aspect in Miami with the better O line, in my opinion, I think that the run game, whoever can establish the run game in this matchup is going to be key because I don't expect Texas A&M to be able to pass the ball as well as Miami. Malachi Tony will also be a big factor because if you factor him in, move him around, things like that, send him in motion to keep the defense on their heels for fake jet sweeps and plays like that. Get him the ball quick, let him use his speed to make plays. I think all of that type of stuff is going to be important in this matchup. But I do think that Miami edges this matchup in a close game because, as I stated, you got to go off what you've seen, and Texas A&M really hasn't beat anybody that would make me believe that they'll go into this matchup and just because they're at home they're going to win. Now, do they have a fighting chance? Of course, they're the better team going in on paper, based on whatever you want to go off of. But again, when you look at their schedule for the conference they played in, they didn't have to see no big dogs. At the end of the day, they weren't the big dogs because they didn't even make it to the conference championship. And now when we're talking about red zone efficiency, Miami has the 11th best red zone offense in the country. Texas A&M has the 75th. And then on third down, Miami's 16th in the country. A&M is 62nd. First downs, Miami's 5 better, so that's close. They're pretty close in sacks allowed. Passing yards, Miami's 15 rankings better. Rushing yards, as I mentioned earlier, A&M does have a better rushing game. But in this matchup, I think Miami has the better O-line. So we'll see how this plays out. But A&M is 25th in rushing. Miami's 77. So there's about a 50, a little over 50 gap there. Yards per play, we're in the same ballpark. Points in the same ballpark. Turnovers is another big one because Miami's 18th and Texas Tech is 77th. And these are just offensive ranks, by the way. Now we'll take a look at the defensive ranks as well. A&M is second in the country in sacks. So kind of like the Bama matchup, I like Bama, even though Oklahoma leads the country in sacks. So A&M gets to the quarterback as well. But of course, Miami's the better passing matchup in this game. So even if they do get more sacks, obviously sacks matter. They're big for the defense. They're big to getting stops. But I think sacks will happen over the course of this game, of course. But the two guys on the other end, Mesidor and Ruben Bain, are problems. Ruben Bain is probably the best pass rusher in the country, so he's going to put a lot of pressure on them guys. And Mesidor on the other side, like if you double either one, good luck. And then we talk about the two guys on the back end of that defense that really don't get a lot of notoriety, to the outside world. But if you watch these guys, you'll get to know them. One's coming back from injury. The other one's there. Y'all will see them in action tonight. But like I said, the big ones is Bain and Mesidor. Them two guys are elite. They will be effective all night, I think. And I think that's why the run game won't be as effective for Texas A&M as it's been all season. But again, that may go the same for Miami because they have the better passing offense considering they haven't faced a team that gets to the quarterback as much as A&M. So I think this matchup is a super good one. Like I said, College Station, probably the best place to play in college football, the toughest places to play. The best if you're them, but the toughest places to play in college football. So it's definitely, a 50-50 game here. But like I said, when I put in all the perspectives and I'm looking at lines, like my side tells me this is probably a true pick 'em based on them having home field, being able to sit as many people. I think it's 100,000 at their venue. Like all of this, them being the higher ranked team by 5 seeds, them having a better record, and all that for them to be 3.5-point favorites. I think that this is basically a pick 'em game here. You can't go wrong either way it goes. But I'm going Miami in this matchup. So let me take y'all over here to my bracket real quick and do Miami. And then you know what? What we'll do for now is I'm going to pick my picks, but we're not going to talk about them just yet because if for whatever reason someone that I choose to win the first round doesn't win the first round, we'll be talking about round 2 picks that are completely irrelevant. So I'm going to make a pick here, but then I'll get back in a minute. But what we'll actually do now then is we can just go ahead and finish this segment up with do y'all think that there were any teams snubbed from the college football playoffs? Because I think this is a topic of discussion that gets real interesting, because my thing is this. I've personally been vocal about adding 2 teams, making it 14. I know the NFL and college football are 2 different ones, but the NFL, that's how many they have. I know they have a wild card round, but at the end of the day, if you added 2 more teams and then you only gave 2 teams a first round bye instead of 4, which is a little insane to me now, especially considering it's now not the Power 4, it's just the 4 best records. So essentially, you could have a team in a, like say the SEC, how they have it this year. Say you could have Georgia and Texas A&M, right? And they could both be a top 4 seed, but one's 1 and the other's 3 or 4. So now you got 2 teams from the same conference with a bye, but yet they didn't even get to play in their conference championship. I just don't understand that. It personally doesn't make sense to me. I feel as though it would make more sense if they added 2 teams. The 1 and 2 get a bye. So that way, if the 1's undefeated, then there's only one loss team that may get a bye with them. There shouldn't be 2 3-loss teams, or I'm sorry, 3 1-loss teams, or 3 2-loss teams that are able to get a first round bye with a team that may be undefeated. That's the first thing. Secondly, then you won't have these situations where you even have to worry about teams being snubbed. Because, for example, this year, you can say Duke at 8-5 didn't deserve to be in because they were the ACC champion. 8-5, rightfully so. You don't deserve to be in the playoff. Now, with that being said, Notre Dame and BYU could be in the playoffs, should be in the playoffs. I'm not going to say that because they had the seasons they had, they didn't deserve to be in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Miami deserved to be in the playoffs. Alabama is the team, if I'm being honest, it's arguable for me. And this is why. Out of all those teams that I just mentioned, Notre Dame, BYU, Miami, and Bama. Bama by far played the toughest schedule. But the last month, they've been playing the worst ball. On top of that, they got blown out in the SEC championship, which gave them their 3rd loss. So, despite the toughest schedule, you played in the conference championship and got embarrassed, essentially, getting blown out by Georgia to go to your 3rd loss, and every other team has 2 losses, and your schedule's that strong makes up for 1 less loss. I think that's where it gets tricky. But again, a team like Bama or Bama fans are going to look at it as, well, because we played in the conference championship, although it was an ugly game, should we get bounced for being in the conference championship? Because if so, does the conference championship weight hold at this point? If I can make that game to have an opportunity to represent my conference, but then I lose and I get put out the playoffs. So I think you would resolve a lot of issues if you just went 14 teams and only gave 2 teams the first round bye, which I think would make more sense anyway. And then another reason I might edge BYU in over Bama, even though Alabama's the better team. Don't get that messed up when I say these things, but these are just takes that make sense, in my opinion, based on everything that we have in front of us. BYU lost to Texas Tech twice. That's their only 2 losses, Texas Tech. Texas Tech is a top 4 seed. They've been one of the best teams all year. Their only loss came in a game where their quarterback was hurt, right? Like, other than that, they've played great football. Yes, BYU got blown out by them twice, but can you take a team that played a tougher schedule but had 3 losses over a team that had 2 losses to a top 5, top 4 team, to be specific, in the country all season? Because essentially, if BYU doesn't make the conference championship, they're in the playoffs. They're probably in the playoffs because if Notre Dame was in front of them as well. But if Alabama loses, they probably automatically have to put BYU in if they weren't playing in the conference championship. So because they both played in the conference championship, they decided to take Alabama's 3 losses in a blowout and then look at BYU's 2 losses and their conference championship blowout and decided they didn't deserve to make it. And on top of that, BYU was the only Power 4 conference team with at least 11 wins to not make the playoffs. So despite what you feel about BYU, I feel like if anyone honestly got snubbed out of Duke, BYU, and Notre Dame, it would have been BYU. Because their 2 losses, like I said, were to a top 4 team in the country, a team that has a first-round bye. And one of them being in the conference championship, which they clearly didn't punish Bama for, which they lost to a top 4 team as well. That they had already beat earlier in the season. And then they turned around and got dominated by them, and they fall a few spots. And again, this isn't me saying Alabama didn't make it. I'm just saying, based on the schedules, for BYU to be the only Power 4 team with 11 wins to not make the college football playoff brackets when their only 2 losses was to a top 4 team, I could understand why they feel that way. Notre Dame, it's tricky because they're independent. It's also tricky because the 2 best teams they played, they lost to, and that's Notre Dame and Miami. They lost to both of those teams. They were early in the season. I completely understand that. But when you're talking about what matters, if you're not in the same conference, the only thing you can do is go off head-to-head. And when you go off head-to-head, they both have the same record. Miami won the head-to-head. I feel like the committee did the right thing by putting Miami in over Notre Dame. It's unfortunate because the week prior, or the few weeks prior, Notre Dame was ahead of Miami in the polls. But what that was, from what I'm seeing, is the fact that BYU was the 11 seed and they were in between Miami and Notre Dame. But once BYU lost, they fall back. You put Notre Dame and Miami side by side. Now you have to go off of other things, which, of course, head-to-head is number 1, as long as it's not a conference opponent, because there's nothing else to go off of, because you're not going to have a lot of common opponents if it's not a conference opponent. You know what I mean? So that was a tricky situation, but I definitely understand why Notre Dame fans would feel the way they feel, considering they were there for, however many weeks leading up to that final decision when they decided to take them out. And then Miami, that situation was very weird because I believe that Duke making the conference championship was a little absurd when things went the way they went, because the ACC has the power to overrule, I believe, the ACC, because I've seen this in the Big Ten before with, I believe it was Indiana and Ohio State a couple years ago. You can choose, so maybe the conference is different, but I know, like I said, for a fact that I'm pretty sure it was Ohio State and Indiana situation a couple years ago in the Big Ten championship when this happened. But what I'm getting at is, if the rules are the same, the ACC, because of the way that the ACC, because let me pull up these ACC standings here just so I can be completely specific with this, because it was actually pretty crazy. I think there were 4 or 5 teams with the same record, same conference record, right? But it didn't. The weird thing was some of the teams didn't play. So you had Duke, Miami, Georgia Tech, SMU, and Pitt, all 6-2 in the conference, because overall records don't matter, right? But the weird thing here was Miami was ranked as a top 13 team. Duke was unranked. Virginia was leading the conference at 7-1, right? But they were ranked number 17. So Miami was the highest ranked team in the conference, but because Virginia was in first, they were still ranked behind Miami because of the last time Miami lost. Duke, for whatever reason, jumped up there because SMU got upset, because SMU was supposed to be in a SEC championship, but they got beat. Or the ACC championship, excuse me. So they got beat on the last week by Cal, so they fell out. And then it became this tie between all 4 of these teams. And what I'm getting at is the ACC, if the rules were the same as the Big Ten, could have chose which team, because they all have the same record and didn't play head-to-head, got in. And they chose to put Duke in over Miami when Miami was the highest-ranked team in the entire conference, which then, by the luck of the draw, it worked out to where Miami did get in because of the BYU loss and putting them and Notre Dame side by side, so they had to jump for the head-to-head. But the ACC almost fumbled the bag because Why would you not put Virginia Miami when it's 12 versus 17? That way, whoever wins that game is for sure to get in the college playoffs. Instead, they decided to let Duke get in. Duke beats Virginia on the upset, which I predicted in a previous video. Y'all can go fact check that. And then the ACC almost didn't have anybody in their conference at all representing for the college football playoffs. So that was a situation I didn't understand because, of course, Miami, I damn sure think would have beat Duke, Virginia, because I even picked Duke to beat them. But at the same time, it is what it is. It worked out for Miami, but the ACC definitely could have did better there because I think they almost messed up their chances big time with that one. I definitely think they almost messed up big time with that one. So I think that between that and then, like I said, you talk about those snubs, it's tricky. You go 14 teams, you don't have to worry about it. So again, I think BYU, the only Power 4 team with 11 wins to not make the playoffs, I think that's tough. Like I said, considering they lost to one of the top 4 teams twice, one of them being in the conference championship. I know they were blowouts, but Texas Tech is the real deal. They can actually go win this thing based on what I've seen out of them. So it is what it is. If BYU isn't competitive enough to win it all, they definitely were deserving enough to be in the college football playoffs, considering those two things I just mentioned. Notre Dame, like I said, because of BYU losing, I feel like that's why they didn't get in, because they chose to keep Bama over them, and BYU was in between them and Miami, which ultimately made them choose Miami over them once they became side by side because BYU dropped. So it was unfortunate for them, and in Miami, I mean, they got in, and you can't say they got in, so it worked out for them. And then, of course, they decided to put Tulane and JMU in. Now, this is where it gets tricky because any of them teams we've talked about other than Duke, because they were 8-5, but even I would argue Duke, because their resume, their record, their 5 losses are better than, and this sounds crazy, are better than any win on JMU or Tulane's schedule, I would probably say, because there's one thing that has to happen with this. I'm fine with one group of 5 school. It can't be 2. There's no way that you have an 11-win BYU team that plays in a Power 4 conference and played in their conference championship that lost to the top 4 team twice out of the playoffs for a group of 5, for 2 group of 5 schools. There's no way that Notre Dame, being who they are, being ranked in the top 10 for the last however many weeks, decide y'all want to bounce them to put Miami in because of the head-to-head and then put a two group of 5 schools over them. That doesn't make sense. Duke was 8-5, so understandable. But at the end of the day, this may be, some people may agree or disagree with this, but Duke is a better team than either one of Tulane or JMU as well. And they play in a Power 4 conference where they were able to be a conference champion nonetheless. So you could put Duke in over both of these teams as well, and they wouldn't come in as 20.5-point underdogs as JMU is in their matchup for sure. Now, with that being said, like I said, I'm cool with one group of 5 school. It cannot be 2. If it's 2, there has to be some type of qualifications that their schedule has to meet to be eligible to make the college football playoff bracket. Because there's no way that you can take teams that are ranked in the top 15 from 13 to 15 and leave them out. But then you could take 2 group of 5 schools that are ranked in probably 17 to 25 and put them in. That just logically doesn't make sense. And you're rewarding them for a conference championship, but then you're not punishing others for losing the conference championship. Like if you put JMU in for winning their conference championship, you take Bama out and leave Notre Dame in since they lost their conference championship, especially in dominating fashion. And then I feel like that would come together and make a little more sense. But even then, I don't believe that at any point in time, 2 group of 5 schools should be in the playoff. I personally feel as though there needs to be another championship created for group of 5 schools that are unable to make the college football playoffs. Meaning, if there's 2 or 3 schools that may be 11-1 or whatever their record may be, 10-2, and only one of them can get in the playoffs, then you take those other teams with other top teams that's a group of 5 and put them in a little 12-team playoff bracket or something. So that way there's still a champion of the sort at that level. And then there's 1 or 2 that, based on a dominant season, they deserve to come play with the big dogs. But again, if you switch the playoff bracket to 14 teams, we're not even having this discussion, because even if JMU and Tulane are in, you know who else would still be in? Notre Dame and BYU. And the only argument that you could have then was Duke should have got in over one of them schools, which I would still agree, because they're a Power 4 champion. They played a tougher schedule. They lost to better teams. I think they had a loss to UConn, which is a bad loss. But again, UConn's probably better than some of the teams that JMU and Tulane beat. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't have been mad at them 2 schools getting in over Duke. But when you put them in over the only team that has 11 wins in a Power 4 conference that didn't make the playoffs, and you put them in over another team that was ranked top 10 the last month of the season until the final college football playoff bracket came out, that's when it gets tricky. So I think college football does need to fix the format. But nonetheless, we love the playoffs. It is what it is. We know as fans, 10-2, 11-1, whatever it is not a failed season. It's unfortunate because in college football, you'll miss the playoffs like that. This is the only sport in the world where you can lose 2 games in a season and you won't make the playoffs. But there's so many teams, that's how it is going to be, which is why I also think that, like I said earlier in the video, they should make the 1 and 2 seed have first round byes, add 2 more teams, and then you have 2 more first round matchups. That way, the 1 and 2 seed are actually being rewarded for byes instead of 4 teams. There should not be 4 teams getting a bye. When they had it for the Power 4 conferences, okay, cool, it made a little bit of sense. But then the next season changed it. Now it's the top 4 records. It's like, no, they shouldn't do that. At that point, they should add 2 teams. Then they don't have to worry about so much pressure on the committee, because once you get to like 15 through 17, who's going to argue that those teams should have been in the playoffs? You know, but when you got teams that are right there on the outside looking in that deservingly so deserves to be in, that's when the discussions start. And again, even with this year, if you take the 14 playoff format that I'm talking about, where 1 and 2 would get a bye and you would match everybody else up, you could have kept JMU and Tulane in and just kept Notre Dame and BYU. Again, Duke would have been the argument and topic of discussion, but I don't really think it would have been a discussion, because people would have looked at their record and said, okay, 8-5, they can't be in the playoffs. But again, when you say ACC champion, that holds a lot more weight than some 12-1 and probably winning a conference championship. And, you know, I don't want to disrespect these conferences. So these smaller conferences like that, but yeah, it is what it is. I think the 14 teams will be the best solution. Otherwise, you can't put 2 group of 5 schools in, because it's just not right to the big schools. And what you're actually going to do in the long term and grand scheme of things is make teams start getting lighter schedules, because then you had a team like Texas that was 10-3 that you could say was a snub as well, because when you look at their schedule, they had a hell of a schedule. And their 3 losses were to good teams other than Florida, right? Which Florida is a tough team at home. And anybody that is a real college football fan knows that. When you got to go to the swamp and play, you got issues. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just think it's tough, man. They decided to play Ohio State the first game of the season. They lose that game when they could have scheduled, anybody. I'm not going to throw a school out there because I don't want to disrespect any schools, but like, you throw a small school out there and they just spank them, and then they keep their rank. But instead, they decided to make one of the best matchups possible. For the first week, they lose, and then at the end of the season, they got 3 losses, and they want to throw their 3 losses in their face when they lost to Georgia and Ohio State, which, again, they're 2 of the top 4 teams in the country. But what they're doing is holding Florida's loss against them, right? Because let's talk about it. They have 3 losses. Bama has 3 losses. Bama did make the conference championship, no doubt about it. But Bama's 3 losses now. Florida beat them in a head-to-head. They played. So Florida State, Georgia, and Oklahoma, right? Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, right? And Florida, I'm saying Florida. Florida State, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Then Texas lost to Florida, which beat Florida State, Ohio State, and Georgia. So because they didn't make the conference championship, they weren't even in the conversation. But when you compare the losses, their 3 losses are better than the 3 losses from Alabama, although their third came in the SEC championship. So I think it gets real tricky. That's actually another school that you could have put in there. Like if there was a 14-team format over one of them group of 5s, I wouldn't have been mad at that. But again, I think Texas got the bad end of the deal too because they didn't make the conference championship. I mean, they did get smoked by Georgia, but again, they took care of business everywhere else. They took a loss to Florida middle of the season. It wasn't super late. So I feel like although Florida State at one point was ranked and Florida never was, them 2 teams faced off head-to-head, and Florida won that matchup. So when they have the head-to-head, it's there to argue that Texas's 3 losses were better losses than Alabama, and they both finished 10-3. And the funny thing is they didn't play each other either. So, again, the committee has some things they got to fix. College football has some things they got to fix, but nonetheless, we love this shit. College football playoffs is lit. And one last thing before I go, the biggest topic of discussion of all of this is because I'm one of them, so I'm not going to act like I'm not. We keep disrespecting these group of 5 schools saying they shouldn't be there. But remember when all the good schools made it last year, how nasty them first round games were? It was blowout after blowout after blowout. Hold on, let me pull this up. Let's remind y'all real quick. Before we go, let's pull this up because I do want to make a point on this. Because we keep talking about these schools, man, and I tell you what, some of these schools that got in last year, they ain't look like they wanted to be there. So let's talk about this real quick before we get up out of here. Because we had this last year, right? We're going to pull this up because we're going to talk about this, right? So look, we keep bashing these group of 5s, but look last year. Clemson, y'all remember Clemson got in for winning the conference championship. Clemson wasn't supposed to get into the playoffs last year, but they ended up upsetting SMU in the conference championship, so they got in as the 12. Texas beat them by 2 scores in the first round. Tennessee, with Nico last year, they were playing pretty good ball, went in as the 9. Look what Ohio State did to them first round. Mind you, they got JMU coming in as 20.5-point underdogs on the road in Eugene against Oregon. Look how bad Tennessee got beat in Columbus last year. Then SMU, which was the best team in the ACC until they weren't when they lost the conference championship, traveled to Beaver Stadium and got their doors blown off by 28, 4 scores. And then Indiana, of course, did make the playoffs last year, but Notre Dame beat them by 10 in the first round. So, and then, of course, in the second round, Ohio State still put hands on Oregon, 3 scores. Boise State, which had a first-round bye, never should have happened. That's another discussion, though. Beat by 17 in the second round. And then even Georgia right here. I mean, Georgia's Georgia, so you can't really count them, but they got beat by 2 scores. So, I mean, college football playoffs last year, and then Texas got beat by 2 scores to go to the Natty. So, this first round in particular is really what we're talking about. I mean, so you think you're putting Texas right here versus Oregon in the 12-5 spot, right? They lost by 14 last year. This year, the spread's 20.5. What's the Tulane game? The Tulane game, 17.5, and that's the 6-11 game, right? Last year, it was 28, and they're 17.5. So while we're disrespecting these group of 5 schools, Power 4 schools were in them same 2 spots last year and actually got beat almost or worse than the spreads for the projected group of 5 matchups this year in them same 2 seedings. So I think we need to pipe down on them a little bit. I know last year it was kind of crazy. That probably ain't going to be some every year type of stuff. But I'm saying for now, on 12-team format, we only can go off what we can go off. And like I said, the 5-12 was a 14-point game last year. This year, the spread is 20.5. Last year, the 6-11 was a 28-point game. This year is 17.5. And they're both group of 5 school matchups. So you can take that with a grain of salt. They got to kick it off. We got to see how these games turn out. But based on last year, maybe the college football playoffs ain't making the wrong move after all. We'll see. I appreciate y'all tapping in. Please do me a favor. Like, subscribe, comment, hit that bell for the notifications when I drop new content. I appreciate y'all.